Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another NetHope Solutions Center webinar. My name is Madeline No, and I'm with NetHope. And today our topic is Resilience by Design for Nonprofits. And we're very excited to welcome speakers from longtime NetHope partner Unit4 today. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping guidelines for today's session. Please, let's keep this session interactive. Post your questions and comments in the Zoom chat window for our Q&A discussion at the end of the session today. Also look for a follow-up email later today that will include a link to the recording and the collateral for this session. Also, we very much appreciate your feedback. We have a webinar satisfaction poll that will pop up at the end of the session today, and we would like you to take a couple of minutes to please respond and give us your feedback about these sessions. And with that, I would like to welcome Chris Brewer and Yaron Fiji from Unit4 to talk about resilience by design for nonprofits. Chris and Yaron, over to you.
Good morning. Thank you so very much. And good morning, everyone. My name is Christopher Brewer. Title's actually wrong. I'm the global lead for our not-for-profit practice here at Unit4, and I'll be going over the first part of the presentation, and I'll turn it over to my colleague, Yaron. We're going to see him in reverse here, just so everyone knows.
Yeah.
Thanks, Yaron.
Sorry for that, Chris.
It's a small thing. That's the worst thing that happens to us on remote. We're fine. Very excited to be here. We've been participating, and I've been involved with NetHope my entire career, so we appreciate the opportunity. And our goal is to pass on information about resilience. And really, for maybe the first time in the 20 years I've been involved with technology and delivering solutions to not-for-profit organizations, we're at a point where technology providers can start to really make good on that promise for increasing organizational capacity, using tools and delivering platforms and solutions that go beyond rationalizing your application landscape and really focus on having a solution that's infinitely flexible and infinitely scalable, and that will make your organization not only more resilient, but allow you to deliver greater impact. I think we're going to go back to our little photo slides there, Yaron. The introduction. So briefly, for those of you who don't know, I won't do a long commercial, but I will tell you a bit about Unit4. We'll try to frame why we're all here around contextually what I just said, and then kind of what's coming next. What should you be looking for from the technology landscape, regardless of the vendor, regardless of the platform that you choose, that will most benefit organizations with a mission to serve. And as I said, beyond that, increasing organizational capacity, and what we used to see from inquiries from customers or organizations, accountability, transparency, and efficacy, more into increasing impact, increasing capacity, and how do we become more flexible, more scalable as an organization. And we'll talk about this idea of a postmodern ERP, all in about 45 minutes, so plenty of time to ask questions in the Q&A section. So a little bit about Unit4. Unit4 has been around for approximately 40 years. We started in the Nordics. We have about, give or take, 3,000 employees, give more than take, worldwide. Do business in over 25 countries and have direct offices in many of them, with over 35,000 clients. And that number with the not-for-profits a little outdated. We're upwards in near 500 now. So very, very familiar with this particular segment. Go ahead, Yaron. You can just kind of guess what I'm saying. We do business with many of the NetHope members. We're very proud of part of that membership. We participate in these activities because we believe, rather than try to sell any particular software, you need to be a trusted advisor. And so our goal here today is to pass on where we see the vision and the future for technologies for organizations much like yourself. So these are some of the organizations that we serve. Very proud of our association and their willingness to let us use their logos. So why we're all here, go ahead and click it real quick, Yaron. We want to talk about those trends. So some of the criticism I've heard over the past 25 years with not-for-profits and organizations' submission to serve is we develop these technologies, and while they may serve an immediate need or solve for an immediate problem for which the RFP was written, or a particular go-to-market inquiry for any particular solution, and that's sufficient, but we don't give organizations as technology providers this opportunity, and I'm going to use this word specifically, exploit the software that they have, exploit the solutions that they need in order to deliver on their mission and increase that organizational capacity. So we see three trends that are coming in the not-for-profit sector that we think will most impact your organization. I think it's on the next slide, Aaron. So these are the big three that we see. This industry capabilities and that are right-sized for you as an organization. This move from the software, its functional requirements or its functional capacity, into this user experience and automation in particular. And then lastly, and Aaron's going to go into great detail about this, the next and I think probably the most impactful trend is this modern cloud platform, the extendability and the ability to extend the solution and the technology stack that you have in particular. So let's talk about the industry capabilities and right size for your organization. Go ahead, Aaron. So we're going to talk about this maybe in the next slide and we'll visualize it, but gone are the days where we take ERPs that were originally developed for manufacturing, right? And we think about some of the granddaddies and big poobahs inside the ERP space, is that they were taking solutions that were not necessarily built specifically for any particular industry and then modifying them and customizing them and configuring them, kind of torturing the solution, so much so that we have, this very bespoke implementation. It's very unique to that particular organization that developed it, and it did two things. It solidified that particular solution set for your organization, and it made it very, very hard to not only add additional solutions, but expand the functionality of the solution set and the technology stack. And so contrary to being infinitely flexible, it did just the opposite. And far from being infinitely scalable, it did just the opposite there too. It also did another thing for vendors, right? It stuck you with that particular vendor. And so when we talk about industry-specific capabilities, we're talking about industry solutions that are specifically developed for not-for-profits, international NGOs, and organizations with a mission to serve that have pre-configured capabilities with multiple business processes predefined for that industry. So when we look at the big trends, and we at Unit4 only serve 4 markets: professional services, not-for-profit, public sector, and higher education. And all of them have these very specific things in common: fund-driven, budget-driven, people-centric, and they come pre-configured with the finance, HR, project management, all developed simultaneously to work towards those particular ends, those that are unique to those particular industries. So we think this is one of the big trends. We think it's not necessarily a game changer, but you as an organization need to evaluate vendors, and are they delivering a industry-specific solution based on their experience and based on their customers that are specifically designed for that industry. The next, and I actually really, really like this one, is this people-centric approach where the ERP experience and the evolution of technology is centered around the individual user. And while we talked about that in the past, and we often tried to demo that, and people talked about dashboards, it was still a process-centric solution, because these ERPs originally were developed for manufacturing, right? There was process A, process B, and while there's still a lot of that in accounting, right? Procure to pay and record to report is a process. What you need to look at, and where we think the next big trend is around people. People are interacting with solutions in a very specific way based on their role and responsibility. They need to get information that's specific to them. And more importantly, they need to interact with the solution in the way in which they get the most benefit from it. And we'll talk a little bit about this in the future. But this move away from the process into the people, and then that also applies to your constituents. And those could be a donor, those could be someone who receives services from your organization. We got to move away from the technology being the center of that particular experience into the people, both internal constituents and external constituents. And we need to look at productivity tools outside the laptop, even outside the phone, and I think technology is going to evolve a little bit quicker even than that into these people-centric solutions. The third and final one is this customer-grade microservices experience, right? So we're looking at the ability for a solution to be extendable and integratable. So when we talk about no-code and low-code integration, and we look at solutions that customers are expecting from their technology provider, it has to be this kind of consumer-grade experience. Gone are the days where we can set up a dashboard and we push that out all to our program managers, and finance uses this dashboard. A particular person, maybe the CFO, she wants to see her information this way, but she also wants to consume it on her cell phone. She might want to have any number of interactions, and that this ability to increase the velocity in which we can increase our organizational capacity and achieve that infinite flexibility we're talking about, and that infinite scalability, we need to be able to extend and integrate the solution instantaneously. At Unit4, we talk about you should be able to get a solution, you should be able to turn it on and use it the next day. And we're going to talk a little bit about this in the coming slides. But if I need to work with fintech, maybe it's M-Pesa in Kenya, I can just bring up that solution set, and we can easily, through no-code or low-code integration, bring it right into the solution and start to exploit those particular applications so we can maximize the benefit. So when we look at them, I think the next another summary slide, Jeroen, these three things will really achieve that resilience, that productivity, that velocity that we've been speaking about. So that industry capabilities, it's right size for your organization. Save the Children is much different than Medical Teams International. It's much different than PATH. And so the capabilities and the functionality needs to be right for that organization and right size so they can deploy it quickly without those huge investments in implementation, and that we can easily adapt it in the future. These user experiences are creating robotic process automation. We're talking about artificial intelligence. We're talking about continuous accounting, and that we have this modern platform rather than a software as a service. We have to look at platforms that can easily extend and expand the solution so that we can achieve. And I actually think the next slide, Jeroen, says infinite scalability and flexibility. Stealing from my own thunder here. Okay, so this is how we look at this kind of traditional ERP. I've talked a little bit about that, but in the new solution sets, we have to look for these service-based ERPs. And you as an organization, because you are organizations with a mission to serve, we have to look at, you have to look at how the usage is based on that individual, right? Find solutions that will not necessarily just be geared to finance, but we can put the people in our organization at the center, those donors, the services, and that information is driven to and from those individuals based on how they interact with the system and the type of information that they need in order to achieve their mission. So I don't know how much gone are the days, but so that achieves my overall theme. I guess I've repeated enough, but that infinitely scalable, infinitely flexible, away from process, into interactions, into information that is actionable, and that in some ways being pushed or pulled from the system by the individual based on their needs. Yeah. Okay. So survey question. Hopefully this will lead quite well into my next pivot point here. But if you just take a second and just say, how old is your television at home? And we'll just give a couple, see if some poll questions come up. And I think this will segue nicely into our particular view of what the information. Oh, I have to do my own survey here. Okay. So we'll see if some of the data comes up. Where are the options for I don't know? Good. I admire that person that doesn't know how old their television is. You're far better than our household. Excellent. So just about what I would suspect, especially given who's on this particular call, but greater than 50% of the people on the call, it's between 2 and 5 years. Very admirable for those 5% that are 10 years plus. Okay, I'll close on. And here's the interesting things, certainly when you relate it back to this idea of platform as a service. Go ahead, Jeroen. Even just maybe 5 years ago, we were looking at solutions from a television perspective that needed these functional components. And audio files and video files that are on the call maybe recognize this for their own from their own homes. My brother would have 2 or 3 more game consoles, but we have to hardwire these individual components. They were bought separately, they were designed independently. You had to hardwire them and configure them, and often have a great deal of activities related to that particular television in order to get the activities that you wanted in the way in which you wanted to consume information, the way you wanted to interact with the system. And when you compare that with the solution, the televisions that are being produced today, it comes pre-designed, right? The solution of the television now is nothing more than a platform, and it comes with the ability to easily extend, right? It might come preloaded with Netflix or Apple TV, but depending on the way in which we as a consumer want to interact with that particular piece of technology, we can add these applications, and doing nothing more than adding the application and putting in a user name and password, or subscribing or not, in many cases free. It's immediately added onto that particular platform, and we have the ability to consume it. Moreover, my partner and the kids have their own profiles, and we can restrict those profiles, just so I'm a good parent, so that they're allowed to interact with the system in a particular way. Go ahead, Jeroen. So this technology is kind of ubiquitous, and from a consumer perspective, it's invading our homes and maybe even our offices, where we're using other technology platforms that will go out and fetch information. Siri and Alexa. In our case, we have a bot called Wanda. They will go out and get information based on what we want or need, right? So we can take that information regardless of where we are and make it actionable. So right, if we look at the bottom left-hand corner, work in progress, % complete, we can ask conversational questions to the platform and get information for us that we need at the time, maybe outside of the working environment. In the bottom right, that particular man's working on the solution, and you can ask a question about the project and the scheduling. It'll go out and get that information and augment the work that they're doing. So this kind of consumer grade experience, I think, is going to become ubiquitous, and that's a particular philosophy that Unit4 has. And we think some of the big 3 trends that you'll be seeing or should be looking for in your acquisition. Let me give you a great example, a little multimedia. This is Wanda, our digital assistant.
Place.
Chris, still there?
I'd muted myself. I was speaking away.
Oh,
Could you go back with just one slide, Jeroen?
I thought we were using Wanda.
Yep, yeah. Can you go back one slide?
Yeah, that's the video.
Yeah, no, okay, I'm sorry. So you could see that he was via mobile app asking information to the database, and that was returning information and asked it to visualize that information. And those technologies exist today. We have the ability to consume microservices via these SaaS platforms. And so we can pick amongst any number of these tools that we want to use as a consumer of that particular platform, bring it onto the medium in which we want to communicate or need to communicate or get that information, and then push it into the system so that we can consume it on demand. Yep, so this idea of using microservices. Thanks, Jeroen, go ahead. And you do this today, right? And we see it is commonplace amongst certainly international NGOs or other organizations. oops, I need to shrink that, in the form of ICT4D, or Information Communication Technology for Development. And these technologies are almost endless. When I was at the NetHope meeting in Jordan with many of the NetHope members there, we talked a great deal about their need to have particular ICT applications specific to the Middle East, or even specific to Jordan, in order to deliver on that mission. Go ahead, Jeroen. And any number of things, right? From agriculture, health and wellness, however we're delivering that information to our particular constituents. And I put that, if you remember that slide where there was a person in the middle, that we might need data from that particular application about participation or success rates from those particular ICT tools that we're using, and pulling them into the system based on some trigger or completion and the like. And so organizations like yourselves are doing this today. It's just looking for a platform that will allow us to bring in that data in a seamless way without extreme integration and coding and cut and paste, or Excel exports and imports. So these platforms as a service that have the ability to integrate these no-code, low-code integrations will bring so much more data into the solution, so that we can monitor efficacy, we can talk about impact, we can look at capacity, we can understand efficacy, and ultimately build that infinitely flexible, infinitely scalable, where I don't know, Catholic Relief Services in Jordan needs this, Catholic Relief Services in Vietnam needs this, and they have the ability to put those ICT tools to work in those particular locations based on the projects and programs they're running. Yep, almost finished for you, Jeroen. I think maybe one or two slides. So this is kind of an interesting poll question. If we bring this one up, I'm curious internally how many applications you think your organization is using. I'll put in Unit4, so when the survey data comes up, I'm kind of curious if we get the same distribution. We did a survey amongst the organizations that we do business with, and we'll kind of see if you fall out within the same distribution. Maybe it'll look like our TVs. See if the survey data comes up. Yeah, actually, exactly. We do see that, and this is often a function of size or complexity, and that's a limiter for organizations much like yourselves, right? As we increase this capacity or complexity, we're looking for these individual applications in order to serve particular. Oh, it went away pretty quickly. At Unit4, we did a survey internally. We used 229 at Unit4, so we're on the deep end of the scale there, but to have a solution that has that ability to integrate those applications in a seamless way, use robotic process automation, artificial intelligence, is going to be significant, as for all the reasons we detailed. Yep. Go ahead, Jeroen.
Trying.
Yep, there we go.
There we are.
Okay. I think this is you, yes?
Yeah, for sure. So let me explain a little bit more about this extendability of your platform. So it's not only your ERP that's within amidst kind of the different apps you're running, and there's far more that you consume and that you get data from, and there might be apps that Chris mentioned about for people kind of monitoring, sending you kind of monitoring data, but then think about all the kind of the backend processes that enable your organization to work, from HR, procurement, finance, and so on. So let's take a closer look at kind of our hypothesis is that an average organization runs between 100 and 250 software applications. And of course, it's a little bit within the definition as well. But let me give you a closer look at that. But before we go into the detail, I like to kind of take a step back and talk a little bit about the common data model for nonprofits, because I think working with nonprofits from a kind of a product management perspective, this is a piece that is very strong. And I know this is initiated by Microsoft in conjunction with NetHope. So for that, it already needs a big compliment. But this is something where the nonprofit sector is unique, having their own common data model that defines all the different objects and attributes you require within your organizations, from awards, delivery frameworks, constituents to things like items and vendors and donor data. if you take that and from a software vendor perspective, that's really easy to use, because then it's far more easy to make systems interoperable and get data insights across different systems, because we know that a constituent in, call it Microsoft CRM or CE, ends up, if that needs to end up as a donor within your accounting system, we know how these definitions work and what attributes come with it, so we can more easily integrate and make systems interoperable. So that's a big cheer here for the sector and the initiative that has taken place and is continuing to kind of evolve. But it's interesting from this aspect of what we like to call an industry-specific enterprise mesh. And this is one specifically for nonprofits. And you can put any kind of logos in here, and you might have your own ones that you can now already start thinking about. But I'd just like to guide you through kind of a couple of examples here to explain how many actually there are that you might not be aware of. So you see in the middle ERPX is our kind of current ERP solution. If I quickly zoom into that, that's kind of what covers your full kind of grant lifecycle, projects lifecycle, integrated with HR or HCM, human capital management capabilities, including talent management, talent engagement, procurement, finance. So that's kind of the heart of I think most of the organizations. If you have an ERP strategy, there is nonprofits that have a best of breed strategy where you buy or acquire anything that you need from a best of breed strategy, and you have a separate finance system and a separate project monitoring system and a separate procurement system potentially. But kind of integrating that all into one has benefits as well. But then around that, there is different other apps that you use or you might use or might not use. So let's take a closer look into, for instance, CRM or fundraising. And of course, if you think about the big three with Microsoft Dynamics and Blackboard and Salesforce as a couple of examples, it's not only about constituent management and grants and your delivery framework and donations that you might put into your kind of add-on for fundraising within these CRMs, but it's also about kind of event management and ticketing and volunteer management, depending on the type of nonprofit organization you are. If I then move on to kind of grant management, and if you think about the whole pre-award proposal, getting funding in, and here you see Flux as an example, and the whole disbursement process when you sub-award yourself to kind of others, local partners, local agencies. That's another process that needs to share data, that needs to collect data from one system into another, or one app into another. It needs to be interoperable. If I then move on to more humanitarian aid or supply chain and logistics, you see also there is this frontline humanitarian logistics standard called the FHL standard. Again, a data definition, part of the common data model, which helps making ERPs with kind of logistics more interoperable. Gives you an insight in kind of stock levels and your procurement process and an audit trail from your kind of gifts and kinds and your receipts and almost to the last mile delivery to your beneficiaries or individual households. And that means that you need to share items and you need to share vendor data and you need to share or need to replicate goods and gift receipts because you want to do your invoice matching on your finance system in the ERP. And these are more kind of functional areas. FP&A is another one where it's more about business planning and how do we plan the future and how we consolidate if we are multi-entity organization with deploying projects and implementing in different countries. How do we kind of report that from a corporate performance management perspective and do more strategic planning? Another level of apps that bring data and need to collect data. But that was kind of more functional. If you move into more collaboration and collaborative way of working, it's Office Suite, Teams, or Slack integration where you collaborate in kind of team sites and channels. Think about what would happen if you create a new project in your ERP and automatically that gets created in Teams as a team site, so you can collaborate and all the members that you plan or staff that you plan to or assign to work on that project get automatically populated as members of your team site, so you can start working together within teams. And even you saw the example from Chris on the kind of the digital assistant. The digital assistant resides within Teams, resides within Slack, resides within Skype. So as soon as you want to get some data from the ERP, you can directly start a conversation as if she's one of the team members within your team and get the data as you saw in the recording you showed. So not only kind of functional apps, it's also collaboration apps, something that we have seen evolve over the last year, especially with the pandemic around. It's document sharing, not only things that you store within the ERP, but everything around it, Box, SharePoint, other document management tools you want to share documents with. Think about e-signing documents, think about searching within documents and document content. And then there's a whole set of kind of more specialized services. Think about reaching out to company info or vetting of your suppliers, government watch lists to check credibility of your donors and vendors and your resources or volunteers. Credit checks, treasury. Think about a lot of our nonprofits, especially in an international environment, have a multitude of bank accounts and different banks they work with, even to local banks and in local currency. So the more banks you get, is you have to create a single integration to each of these banks to send your bank files over and retrieve the bank or the payment files from them. That itself is already a number of apps you need to connect to. Tax handling, Avalara, you see it popping up there. Bank payments and receipts, Stripe. If you have a separate kind of payment gateways you need to connect to. Kyriba is a treasury solution that also does banking connectivity and more kind of advanced treasury where you can sell and buy currencies as an example there. And I think the last kind of selection of apps that are around your kind of ecosystem is related to kind of reporting tools or BI tools or identity providers like the likes of well, maybe Microsoft, but also Okta as a provider, or Delboomi as an integration platform you might want to connect to, because it's not only the Unit4 platform you might want to connect to other solutions, but it's also these individual solutions or apps that need to integrate and need to be interoperable with each other. So let's see whether after kind of this showing you all these different examples of things you might think of, whether we need to revise the number you put forward in the kind of initial poll.
We'll see. There's a lot of tech people on this call in NetHope in general. They might have had it dead on before.
Yeah, I have even not talked about kind of monitoring tools and individual apps or collection evaluation tools, learning management, also in the HR domain, there might marketing domain where you have things like Marketo and the kind of the way you reach out to your constituents and talk about what campaign management and so on.
Hey, you know, Jeroen, this might be a good time. We're waiting for the data. Oh, stayed about the same. See, we have people who know what's going on. There was a great question in the chat, and maybe you can think of a specific example. I was racking my brain. It says, can we share any examples of nonprofits bringing rogue apps into the system and finding real value from the data when connected to the organization system like finance or HR? I was thinking about M-Pesa, but then I think that's not really what they're speaking about. I think maybe what you were talking about, if there's a particular application that you've seen be brought in, some of those organizations that are doing that.
Yeah, I can think about the example where you collect monitoring data from vaccinations of malaria. People kind of that you research on malaria in different African countries and then bring that in to see whether you can predict an outbreak. That might be a good example.
That's a specific example I was aware of. That's a good. They actually were monitoring the temperature of a particular cohort over time, and then if the temperature spiked on that particular cohort, they knew that they would within 2 weeks have a malaria outbreak, and then they sent medicine preemptive approach and then doing vaccinations and treatments. That's a great example, and a real example being done by a NetHope member. So, yeah, that's a great one.
But we also do things like sentiment analysis. So it might not always be something where you define what we call microservice or an app to do something kind of functional. But it might also, you can also think about what if for your donors you can get to kind of a point where you get all their Twitter feeds and get a sentiment on what is kind of the view from the public and the public opinion on such a donor, and then use that within your kind of decision making. But that's not something you can think of kind of straight away, because you typically think about Dun & Bradstreet rating and vetting or government watch list. But that's something
that'd be interesting if you were doing it with refugees and monitoring maybe how the program was being received for that particular cohort in that location. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we'll move on and we'll see if there's other questions that come up.
Yeah, I don't think we got so the figures, maybe the figures got up because we had a range between 50 and 100, and people might have said, well, it used to be 50 in my first answer, but it's now more close to 80.
Yeah.
But it's interesting to take a look. I think where it comes back to is, if you take the summary, what we see is that there is no single technology provider that can do all of you, can kind of serve you with your entire enterprise architecture that you need, from CRM and fundraising to all these different apps I talked about, or different capabilities I talked about. So there is a need to be interoperable to other systems and to get data insight, because some piece of information sits in one system, in your CRM fundraising system, another piece sits in your business planning or FP&A solution, another part sits in your actual sit in your ERP, and how to combine these and get a view on that. Typically, customers put a big data warehouse on top, or data lake, and get all the data out and then try to get some insights. But tools that nowadays, especially with kind of the second point, APIs being around and technology moving into this application programmable interfaces instead of file transfer, allow you to do kind of online and real-time connections and data synchronization. So that means that you get the data from one system into another system, and you can real-time see that a donor or constituent that you create in your CRM automatically flows into your ERP, or into your sales suite, or your event management system, or into your marketing stuff to start kind of communicating to that constituent. And then I think the last point is about, and we're raising a new buzzword here potentially, but is monolithic ERP. All these ERPs have a background where they have built as one single integrated piece of a big ERP. And that's also where most of our customers and nonprofits get a bit anxious when we talk about ERP, because that feels like a big bang. That feels like it's a project that's never ending, always too late to be delivered, always being delayed, not giving you results that you or objectives, or cannot make the objectives that you thought about when you initially started it. But that's shifting. ERPs now become kind of microservices based. So when I run my sales orders and at some point that results in a financial transaction, it's not an integrated, it's more loosely coupled. So it connects to an API, that API sends the data over, and that puts it in your kind of general ledger. So even within kind of, we looked at this whole application mesh where you see other applications around the ERP, but even within the ERP, there is now loosely coupled apps that can communicate with each other. And therefore, if you think about this user experience point you made, kind of your pillar 2, a user that is a kind of an AP responsible for accounts payable within a nonprofit only needs to have the apps that this person needs to do his job, and not this whole ERP where you need to find where need to search for where you find your kind of menu items that you need to work on, or the functions you want to work on. That's now all kind of the future, is that this is all in dedicated apps, almost like you're using your iOS and your iPhone at the moment, where iOS is your platform, and on there is just the apps you want to use, Outlook, maybe Facebook and others, that easily synchronize amongst each other for the relevant data that you can share. So that's kind of where we're moving ahead towards.
So Kelly had a question, and it's specifically about Unit4, but maybe in general, how teams would integrate into Unit4, right? We do that integration and use it on our own solution, and maybe
you can do an integration.
That.
Yeah, you can do another integration the other way around as well. So I talked about integration ERP to Teams for kind of setting up a project team site. If you store documents on Teams, it's just as easy that we put them on the ERP on your project records, so you can retrieve them in there too. It's just as long as there is an API, and of course you need some kind of integration capability within, whether it's your ERP or within your ecosystem, you can easily move data from one to another. It's this typical mapping that you need to do to say, well, if I have this field here, it should become this field in the other application. And that's kind of bringing it back to my point based on the CDM to be so important for nonprofits. That's the unified kind of definition of everything,
right,
at least from a software point of view.
And I think that's out on the NetHope website too. We might put that in our documentation for links later. There's a couple related questions regarding the role of change management and culture being a challenge to getting stakeholders for a massive modernization. I think that's becoming, I don't want to say less of an issue. I think the type of people that we're going to be looking to recruit into not-for-profit organizations and even into our company, they have a different relationship with technology. And I think that organizations that have these platforms can actually use it as their competitive advantage to recruit people away from maybe for-profits where they would spend their careers into the not-for-profit space. I think the expectation, we talk about that consumer grade technology and interfaces, is going to be more and more the norm because people are getting so familiar with interacting with technology, adding these applications onto the platform. Jeroen just mentioned, the iOS and your Apple and your Android and your telephone and your television. I think that's true. I think that if we could start to, during the change management component, focus on value-added activities as opposed to, and we've been talking about this for a long time in my career, focus on value-added activities where they can get more job satisfaction. I think change management's always a significant component. I think it's often underrated and often not talked about from vendors. We act like that we'll sell you this implementation, it's all going to be rosy. I sometimes use a metaphor, maybe bold or not, it's a little bit like change in religions. Everybody's very excited when they convert, and then the hard work of the day-to-day activities of that new faith, it's difficult. They're often tears. And so I think managing the expectations and vendors need to do a better job. When we talk about that, this kind of trend away from monolithic ERP, I think it's less big bang. They see more of the technology up front. They get quicker value, within a few months, and then you can iterate the solution and add on the components as your organization's ability to consume it improves. This is an interesting question, Jeroen, about how not-for-profits evaluate where they are right now and the potential value of investing in that modernization. I think it goes back to just the cost of maintaining those monolithic ERPs that Jeroen detailed so well. There are a lot of organizations that can help, and with return on investment and net present value and the total cost of ownership. I think that where they fall down is what's the future cost of not having a platform as a service and this move toward that technologies that a single vendor can't provide everything. The only thing I've seen with customers that have gone through those processes, they're a little shocked by the savings. Maybe they see it as, oh my goodness, could it really be $1 million a year we save? And I think that time and time again, it's proven out that the cost savings is just so significant, and the cost to change and the ability to adapt and consume those microservices. I think that.
I think, Chris, if I might allude a little bit to that too, is what you see typically happen in. If you start modernization, it's about and digital transformation. It's a lot about the process and functional requirements. And I always learned that if you look at change management, it's people first, then process, then system, right? But we typically start, and especially in nonprofit, I think, where you start with, well, sometimes it starts with product first because you get a free license, or there's something that you can gain that's free of charge. And then you have the product or the system, but you don't know whether it covers your process, and you don't know whether your people actually need it. So for me, it's back to kind of this people experience discussion. What's the user journey you want to make? And from the user journey, we go into what processes do you need to kind of cover, and that gives you the system or the product or tool to use.
Can you see Ming Cheng's question? They've begun using MS Power Platform to create the custom apps. Could you see that one? That's a great question.
And Unit4 is leveraging some of the Power Platform tools as well. So you can connect it to. So the way we see the world at the moment is within our ERP, there is something we call our integration and extension kit, which allows you to build, if you're familiar with kind of Microsoft tools, it's similar to like a flow type of solution. So you can build your flow from one system to another, from one app to another. And in the middle, you can have these Power apps from the Power Platform to put logic in and to put mapping in and to reach out to external APIs and data sources. So we leverage that as well. So we're moving into kind of what they call kind of the low no code application and integrations, where you don't need to have any kind of coding or SQL development skills, programming development skills, but you need to have you need to understand kind of a data model, and then you can do your mapping and the APIs do the rest. And then that's well, it's a level of tailoring your solution for your organization, but it has nothing to do with customization, and it's scalable and also maintainable over a longer period of time.
I just want to go to the next slide, see if there's any more questions in the chat. We'll let them ping away.
Yeah.
So it's where you get to talk about with the lead architect here.
Go ahead.
Yep. Seeing none. I think Laura Woodman was almost prophetic in the statement. I think she almost made it 4 years ago about organizations effectively adapting to that advancing technology. And maybe we could see some of that in the pandemic, where organizations that didn't have the strategy or start down that road to digital transformation. And I think much like telephone technology, it's an opportunity to not only skip going from landline to cell phone, but going from skipping over those technologies and being in a position to be more relevant, to increase that organizational capacity, to be able to rationalize those applications and those landscapes, bring it into the organization, infinitely flexible, infinitely scalable, and ultimately resilient by design. And I think that given those three, well, our particular philosophy and viewpoint of the world are those three positions about where we think technology is going and how NGOs and not-for-profits can take the biggest advantage of that. So we'll hopefully get some more questions. We'll wait. Thank you for sharing the type of applications. Can you see that last one from Andrea? Yep.
Yeah, I think when it comes to scaling and performance, the more applications you run, and specifically now when they run in cloud, scaling up in cloud is the cheapest there is, right? We're not running any on-prem architectures and infrastructures anymore. So that's what helping in this approach. But still, there is a consideration if you have large pieces of data. APIs are meant to do kind of online synchronization, right? Direct real-time synchronization. So it's more kind of piecemeal. So that's an interesting area to look at. Part of what we see as our integration kit toolkit is to have ETL tool. So ETL is extract, transformation, and load capabilities to kind of transform data, because it's never, although we might have the CDM data mapping saying the constituent number in any kind of CRM to Unit4 ERP should be the customer ID in Unit4. There might still be some mapping because the value you have in one system might be different from one in another, and you might need to converge data or diverge data. That's something we take into account as well. And it's really interesting to go to a next phase where we're going to monitor and maintain these integrations for you as part of our services.
Can you talk about the unstructured data, and then we'll go back up and talk to them about monolithic versus point solution with that unstructured data, like emails and the like? Did you see that question? Excel, Word documents. It was really interesting as well.
Yeah, how can we deal with architecture and connectable apps data with master data in the ERP? So we already kind of, I think a lot of solutions already have options to extract data into Excel and into Word, even into PowerPoint. If you want to create slide decks based on figures that come like the actual figures from the month. We also allow customers to update data from Excel directly into the ERP. Think about budgets and actuals. There is also a trend where we can read, especially now since Office is online, can read from your online documents how long you've worked on them and suggest, if you think about timesheet entries based on the documents you've worked on. There are different use cases here that we look into.
There's an interesting question, and if you want to augment what I'm about to say, you're in with regard to this whether the trend is moving away from monolithic ERPs. I would say yes. If it's still worth to move on to one ERP or HCM, I think that wildly depends on your organization and what the particular ERP solution offers from a functionality perspective. Unit4's philosophy is we don't necessarily advocate rip and replace. If that particular HCM system is working, it's effective, you can get the data into the ERP through that integration that we're speaking about. And I would be wary of vendors that we want all the stack, right? We look at the opportunity. You should be able to keep those things that are effective. You should only buy particular components of the application that you need in order to be effective and increase your ability and your capacities. And then integrate it through that no-code, low-code integration and automate all of those processes. So our particular philosophy, it's the platform itself is maybe more important than any of the functional components on the platform, and you evaluate your requirements that way. So I hope that answers your question. Anything you wanted to add to that, Jeroen?
No.
And then, are there when the document comes over in email and in Word, right? There's a way to parse that out, the unstructured data, and use some of the artificial intelligence tools. We do it with optical scanning, but that's more structured when you get an invoice, right?
No, we do that with machine learning nowadays. So if you think about your expense receipts that you get and you need to capture within, we do that in an expense app. The moment you upload your receipt, and there's still something everybody needs to do, it sends it to like a microservice that tries to understand what's on that receipt, and that uses kind of machine learning, because any of these receipts that have been handled before and have been coded, it can learn from and then provide you with a suggestion on which expense type and which date and currency and amount currency were on that receipt, and then based on that your suggestion you can kind of confirm and move on without having to kind of type in any of the data. So that's kind of the level we get to. And we can do the same with things like incoming invoices or purchase invoices that you want to code, and even to the level of detail where we understand what's the kind of the coding on the kind of the cost account or expense accounts that need to be used based on similar examples you've received in the past. A lot of us typically get a rent invoice every month, or a utility invoice every month, or a telephone invoice every month.
Yeah, that's a good question. That's a 5-minute warning. We certainly are not going to go over. So if there's any other questions, we're eager to answer those, and we'll stay on. Thank you so very much to NetHope. We hope that this was insightful and provocative, and we're eager to answer any questions you have. We'll make the presentation available, and I think there's the link to the common data model, and you can find that information on NetHope. That project's well underway. So beyond that, thanks so very much for your time. Any last questions? And if not, we'll just wait till the top of the hour before we sign off. Thank you, one and all.
Thanks, Chris and Jeroen. I think there were a couple other questions.
Oh, good. I missed them.
No, they come through very quickly in the chat, don't they? Let me just see if I can.
Did we talk about the number of apps and affect performance?
I think we got that one. There was a question here that I think we didn't quite get to. Although the number of apps, oh wait, let's see. Well, let's try this one. Although the number of apps is likely increasing, it is also an issue that Excel, email, Word documents are being used instead of structured data, because ways of working, processes, and requirements are driven from organic needs rather than a planned approach. How can we deal with architecture and connectable apps data with master data in the ERP?
That's a big question. You're in, Mohammed. Good job.
Yeah, I think I responded a little bit to that, but I think we still have a lot of customers using Excel because they can do their own expressions and their own calculations and their own. If you think about budget data, you can do that in a system. But if you're more familiar with Excel, which typically everyone is, I think that's fine for us. But there is one but, is that at the end of the process, when you're done and your budget is fully kind of calculated and done and you're fine with it, then upload it into the ERP so it's there, right? And that counts not only for Excel uploads of budgets, but also for actuals or sales orders or any. And what we do within Unit4 is we like you to extract data from the ERP into Excel, so you can validate whether you're budgeting against the correct project, but also against the kind of project structure with the kind of activities that are within the project, and even to the kind of the log frame information that you have available. And that data can reside within your Excel as kind of numbered ranges, so you can validate upfront whether you are using the right data and master data. And then when you upload, we still validate whether all that master data is available and valid within the period you're posting to, or you're entering it in for. But that is not a big deal then anymore, because you already use data that was present within the ERP.
There's another question about booking and travel and expense applications. I mean, we have our own in the ERP. With the booking, right, very common. TripIt, Concur's very popular. And those types of things, you're in the ability to incorporate. We do it, I know we do it internally, right? We use one of the two I mentioned, not to endorse anybody in particular.
Yeah, it's a really interesting use case as well to connect to, and especially with travel agencies, there's only 4 major kind of booking systems in the world. So
yeah, and I think that they make a good point. It was Kelly, I think, you know, getting that pre-authorization, right? We don't do it in the travel app, right? They're kind of connected in our own system, but right, they have to approve the budget, make sure that it's within the parameters, that it's an authorized.
Yeah,
expense.
if you talk outside kind of the integration to kind of booking agencies, we do have like a travel request capability within the ERP, so you can request for travel, get approval, and then create kind of what we call a soft commitment or a cumbrance. Is it that is a future cost that you might get when you receive the invoice from the travel agency or the credit card company, and that can already hit your project at that point in time. And then when you do your expense claim, it takes the information from your travel request that you can alter and then amend with the actual cost before you raise it for approval and payment.
Okay, we're at the very end. I promised we wouldn't go over. I think there might be a closing poll question. I hate to get off, and I don't know the policy, Madeline, but
No, it's fine if we go over a minute or so, but I just
okay.
launched the poll. So if you could
thanks.
take a minute, yeah, before you leave.
Yep. And if, yeah, we want to be cognizant you have other commitments. And so, again, great questions, and thanks for interacting. And then the real conversations happen. It's indicative of NetHope. So, well done. Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
this was a great presentation. Thank you so much to Chris and Yaron from Unit4 for a really interactive, great information session. And thanks to all our attendees for joining us today. Please do look for the follow-up email you'll receive later today or early tomorrow that will include a link to this recording and the collateral, the slides as well. Also, don't forget to fill out our satisfaction poll. We love your feedback, so please take a moment to do that. And again, thank you for attending and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I don't think there's any ending chats. Okay. Thanks, Sharon. Have a great day, buddy. Goodbye.
Thanks, you too.
Thank you. That was great.